Okay. Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Okay. If everybody knows, the bar is open, so have at it. My name's Ron Yokobitis, and I'm co-CEO of Golden Frog, Data Foundry, Gig News, on and on. So we're just here to further talk about taking back your internet. It's ours, it ain't theirs. It's all of us. And us happen to be in 200 plus countries. So we all talk over 200 plus countries. We've opened this stream up to our Golden Frog customer base, which is in 195 countries, and Giga News, which is over 200. So when we want to blank out websites and send emails to the Congress critters, we get German, French folks that say, great, we've been looking for a place to have a say. So this is a place to have a say, y'all. And we got some neat folks up here who've been playing their part in keeping us free and open on the internet. So I want to welcome y'all to Austin and everything that goes on here, which goes on when South by Southwest isn't here too. But anyway, Stacy Higginbotham from Gig and Ohm is going to ride herd on everybody here and keep us in line, keep y'all in line. Don't get too rowdy, but get rowdy. So thank y'all. Stacy.
Hi, y'all, and if needed, I will translate from Texan to everybody else speak. Come on. It could happen. I don't know how many of y'all are local, but I do say y'all a lot. I'm just going to let you know that's not an affectation. All right, louder. Okay.
Okay.
Everybody turn your mics up.
All right. Holy cow. All right, I love you guys in the back who are communicating.
Hello.
Can we work the feedback down maybe, or? Okay, y'all are good. All right, so I'm going to introduce everybody real fast. At the very end, we have Evan Greer, who is with, he brought his fans, he's with Fight for Future. Next we have Kevin Bankston, and he is with the New America Foundation, which is an organization I am a huge fan of. Then we have our host for the evening, Ron Yokobitis. All right. And then we have Representative Bryan Hughes, who is, let's see, you are from Tyler and Longview, Texas. Tyler and Longview, Texas. All right. And then next to me, I have Allie Sternburg. All right, and she is with the Computer and Communications Industry Association. Soon I will not have to consult notes. We can just talk, so I will not do that. So thank you guys so much for coming, and we are going to kick it off really fast with basically everybody talking about, in the wake of everything that's gone on with the NSA, which we're all aware that the... Actually, first... Let's go for a little bit of nuance here, just a little bit. Privacy is important, right? We're all, yay, privacy. How many of us enable location on our cell phones? All right. How many people surf the web without using any sort of Tor, VPN? One more. Okay. All right, you guys, is there a hashtag on Twitter? All right, is it Take Back the Internet?
It's a long hashtag.
Take back your internet. I'm going to follow this on my phone, and you guys are going to have to tweet stuff, not too much stuff. All right, we're going to have to use Twitter for this, y'all. I'm sorry. It's just done. All right, so you guys are very serious about privacy, with the exception of a few of you who are who are just like, Google track me, Apple track me, whatever. So let's start with you guys talking about. They cut my mic. They cut my mic.
This one right here.
All right. We're going to run down, and everybody give me your sense of how privacy is today in terms of people understand the issues and they have access to privacy or not. So both understanding and how much access to privacy the normal person has. Going down. Evan.
Well, certainly we've gained a much greater understanding of the privacy that we do or don't have since June of this past year. I think that one thing that we're seeing is that people have a strong understanding of what's happening with the NSA, since that's been such a hot button issue in the media. But it's important that we connect that to the other surveillance that's been going on for years and years and recognize that a lot of this isn't new. And that we have to really look at the other governmental agencies, corporations, and people outside the U.S. that are surveilling us, and that protecting privacy isn't about just fixing one thing that the NSA is doing. It's about changing our entire culture about how we think about our data, how we think about the things that we put out there in the world, and whether it's okay for people to aggregate them and define us based on the patterns in that data. So I think there's definitely greater understanding, and people are learning about things that they can do. But I think we have a long way to go to connect this and get everyone to understand the big picture.
Cool. Hi, I'm Kevin, and on a personal note, I just want to say I'm really happy to be back here. I live in DC right now, but I went to UT. I wasn't born here, but as the bumper sticker says, I got here as soon as I could, and there's really no place I've ever been happier than Austin, Texas. Where are we on privacy? I think we're in a bad way, but we're actually in a much better way than we have been. We're seeing, I come from a background, I worked at the ACLU, EFF, the Center for Democracy and Technology, and now New America. So obviously I'm trying to work at all of them. And if you found one in Austin, let me know, because I'd really love to come back. But working at EFF, where we focused a lot on government surveillance, and the last time the NSA surveillance programs came to light back in 2005, 2006, we spent years, and frankly, my friends back at EFF are still beating their heads against the wall of secrecy that surrounded NSA surveillance. And it was an incredibly frustrating slog. And to see the sort of floodgates open up, and for all that stuff that we said was true, like, actually the NSA has tapped into our domestic backbone and just sucking everything up and running weird filtering on it. Like, people were like, where's your proof? Where's your proof? Well, we finally have the proof. We're seeing a lot more transparency from the companies, not only about national security surveillance, but about regular law enforcement surveillance, stuff we've been trying to get reform on for years, either on the Hill or here in Texas with some success. Thank you, Texas. And we're seeing, finally, major mainstream media spending a lot of resources trying to explain these issues to us. For example, like the Wall Street Journal, its multi-year What Do They Know series, sort of detailing like all the different apps that are leaking information about you. And so I think we now know enough to know that we're in a really bad spot and that collective action is necessary to preserve our autonomy and our ability to maintain some level of privacy in our thought and our action and our association as we move into a really exciting but kind of horrifying 21st century. So that may not sound like a message of hope, but it really is. We know more than we've ever known before, and we know more than ever before how badly we need to act and act now. So that's where I think we are.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Kevin and Fred von Lohman's work at EFF, when he was at EFF, and his seminal work on freedom, liberty, and putting the spotlight on all the shenanigans that are going on, the surveillance of us. And of course, Evan with Tiffany Chang and Holmes from Fight for the Future are the folks that organized all the disparate groups on the net to email bomb Washington. And they had no respect for us. They could steamroller whatever they wanted through SOPA, but these rabble-rousing got the pitchforks and the shovels out in the street. And so, this is so things are getting better because we all are getting more aware and focusing the light. And of course, Representative Hughes from Texas we've worked with on getting Texas to pass the only bill that requires a search warrant for your content, your email. So this state, contrary to what you may read, is really a haven of liberty because it's in the people. Y'all don't realize, but you know, these people here in Texas, we think a little differently, and we think we're open, free, and we don't want you getting in our chilies. Okay? So Representative Hughes, Carona, and a few, you know, that's the cabal in our legislature, and it's Democrats and Republicans. This happens. We've got both lobbyists that really cranked on this, good Republican and a good Democrat, because, you know, we got to get folks talking about it. There's a commonness in all of this because, but anyway, and of course, Allie is from CCIA in Washington, which is a group we donate to and work with, and they're just public activists that a lot of the issues they put effort behind we agree with. Open internet, these kind of privacy issues. So we bring her down. We didn't get the big guy or the big lady, but we got Allie. I'm not depreciating her, but there's some really giants in this organization. And I'm so happy that Stacy is going to run the show and keep me from talking too much.
I was about to say, Joe. All right, state of privacy. Go for it.
Well, okay, I think,
Yeah, sure.
let's give it back to you. All right. Thanks. I have some great news for you. The legislature is not in session, so relax. Enjoy your evening. Our founders wisely gave us this part-time legislature, so we go down here. We come down here for 140 days every 2 years. I know, better if it were 2 days every 140 years. I know. And then we go back home and we have to give account for what happened. And so some good things are happening. We're encouraged about that. That warrant for content email amendment, Representative Stickland from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a number of us worked on that, and we're very encouraged with that. There is work to do. You were talking about location service. You know, even with your location services turned off, you probably know this, but the government can track you by your cell phone based on the towers you're lighting up and the repeaters and the FemCell and all those devices out there. They can get that data without a warrant, without probable cause, without your even knowing that they had it or what they're doing with it. So we've got some work to do there. Now, Texas made progress. We had a bill in the House with over 100 co-authors, passed the House, didn't quite get through the Senate. It takes a while in the Senate sometimes. We'll get back to them next time. So we're encouraged overall. And what you said about Texas heritage, again, people tend to kind of broad brush politics in Texas, but folks are big on freedom and liberty, and they mean that. Those aren't just phrases. My friend Scott Henson pointed out to me that Texas was protecting her citizens from wiretaps decades before the feds ever thought about it, because we believe in privacy and liberty and freedom here. So hopefully we can continue to move that way, and I'm tickled to be on this panel and honored to be asked. Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, my co-panelists have done a great job kind of laying out the land, but one other thing I would say is that the companies that we represent at CCIA, which include Data Foundry, of course, and about 20 other companies, I think that a lot of companies have been recognizing how much people care about privacy and have been doing a lot more to be transparent and to offer a lot more controls for people's data and other protections. And additionally, there have been a lot more new companies coming out, and you can really compete over privacy, which I think is a really important thing. And so that's one other thing that I would add, is that there are definitely companies recognizing that these things are important and people will pay for different kinds of services and features on programs that control their data. So yeah, thanks again. I agree with lots of great stuff being said by the rest of the panel. And I'd also like to say that I've never been at an event, even when whether I've been playing music or speaking on a panel, where everyone's been paying attention so much. It's amazing to see people actually looking. No one's looking at their phones. People are actually looking. This is amazing. So thanks for your attention. It's great to see that so many people care about privacy. Yeah, go for it.
We're going to share the mic down here. Okay, so let's get this started with, I'd like to break this up into two thoughts, because I think it might be easier and might be a natural breaking point. One is government surveillance. So your rights under the government with like law enforcement, search and seizure, but also, and then the other thing is consumer surveillance. So this concept of apps and data leakage, et cetera. And yes, the government can subpoena and get that information. We can talk about that too. But I think that's probably a good framework as you guys are discussing these issues to kind of make that very clear to what you're talking about. So with that in mind, I'd love for you guys to actually, like maybe 2 or 3 of you, so give me a show of eyebrows or something who has a great story. But I'd love to get a couple examples of data leakage and how that affects the consumer, like from the app side. So give me your eyebrows. Who's got a good story? Okay, Evan's nodding along excitedly. So we'll give.
I thought Kevin had a good one. That's why I was nodding.
Oh, he gave me the no
I
eyebrows.
work mostly on government surveillance myself.
All right, we have no consumer side stories. Okay.
I got
Let me just say, last year at South by Southwest, we've had booths all up until this year, but nevertheless, everybody was wanting to. Young kids are coming up to me with their latest social networking app, and here, try it. It's free. Just put it on your iPhone. And I said, I don't want your damn spyware on my phone. And, they look at me quizzically. That was before Snowden. I don't think I would get that quizzical look today from, the free lunch bunch. I call them. It's a free lunch on the internet. There's no free lunch on the internet. And, it's surveillance society we have. And these apps are surveilling you. So here, it's free. Think about free. The price is very high. It's your liberty, it's your property, because your information is property, and you're giving it away. It's very valuable. So I think there's and when the government does it, they're taking your property without due process. So we got a real civil liberties Fifth Amendment issue here. Besides Fourth Amendment, you just got to realize how valuable you are and what you think and what you do. And enough said, but South by Southwest is almost dedicated, in a way, to your privacy linkage. So be careful.
I'll just add to that. There's an axiom out there, and I think it's very true. If you're not paying for the service, then you're the product. Either your eyeballs are being sold or information about you is being sold. Somehow they are deriving value from what they know about you or what they know you are doing. And so when you are getting a free service, it's really critical, and I think a lot of the privacy thought right now is focused on ensuring that you actually know what is the bargain that you are making. Why is this free? How is it why are they giving me this? And what are the permissions that I'm giving them when it comes to sharing my information? One of the challenges we face, and I think it's a really long-term serious challenge that like every developer, the FTC, lawyers everywhere are trying to figure out is how do we actually effectively notify you, the user, of what information you're sharing and when you're constantly installing new apps. You're clearly not going to read all the terms of service. In fact, there was a great study by a professor about like gauging how many hours it would take you to read all the terms of services you agree to. It was something like a third of your waking life. I mean, it was freaking insane. And so, yet at the same time, we don't want to say you can't make these agreements. So I think one of the big challenges we face is how do we ensure that everyone knows what they are agreeing to when they agree to it? And I don't think anyone has a great answer to it yet. And one other thing, like another hard issue is the answer can't simply be, well, make it a pay service, because then you end up with a digital divide where the poor are giving up their privacy while it's the privileged who get to afford to have privacy. And that's not a good answer either.
Kevin, you just took my point.
Sorry.
I was going to bring up the fact that AT&T in Austin is launching a eventual gigabit service, and they have a $20 off if you let them watch and monitor your surf habits. And I was just informed by someone, oh my gosh.
AT&T does not want you to hear what she has to say.
dropping like flies.
That most consumers, like over 75% of consumers, are apparently choosing the cheaper version, which you can guess from the advertisements on Kindles and getting $20 off a Kindle that people do. But that's a really good point, is that we're moving to an economy where you have to pay for privacy. So my question for you guys as panelists, thinking about this in Washington and in the state legislatures, what kind of reforms do we want to see to make privacy both more of a right, but also just to make sure that this isn't something that only wealthy people can afford? How do you write laws around that or regulations? We'll start with our regulators. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. My primary concern has been in the area of the government tracking us, invading our privacy. But this is a legitimate question, and I think we're going to find the answer in not to just say this because I'm sitting next to him, but what Ron and his companies are doing. I believe there's going to be a free market solution to this because everybody wants privacy, right? And some are willing to pay for it. Some are more able to pay for it. You made a good point. We don't want it to be only available to the rich, to the wealthy. But I bet we have some business people here and we have some folks that understand the free market. If you want to make a lot of money, make a product or service that the rich folks can afford, and you'll make some money because there's a lot of them. But if you want to make a lot of money, you make a product or service that regular folks can afford, that they need, that they want, and you'll get really rich doing that. So the market is going to catch up if the government isn't putting barriers in place. Let me just digress for a moment. You know, before I got elected, I assumed that the business lobby, and by that we could mean a trade association for a certain industry or a certain company's lobbyist, I assumed that they would come to us and say, Representative, we want free markets, we want low taxes, low regulation, you just leave us alone. And some of them do. But you know, many of those folks come to us and they say, we want you to pass this law making people buy our product, or putting a tax on our competitor, or giving us a subsidy, or asking us to come in and regulate their industry to keep the little guys out. And so if the government does its job, if we don't get in the way, right, if we keep the market free and open, then the free market will respond. But we got to make sure the government is not screwing it up. That's my view.
Any others? Go for it.
Sure, I think this is a super important question, and it's been said that if you want to know the future of surveillance, look at the past of surveillance on poor communities and communities of color, because people have been experiencing this for years in extremely intense ways, and it has very real consequences. I think that's important too, because we can often talk about this in abstractions, where it seems like, well, government surveillance is creepy. It's not just creepy, it's tearing families apart, it's landing people in jail. It's having real impacts on our communities. So we need to recognize that and not just think of it as something that's kind of scary, but something that is dangerous. Now, as far as what we can do about it, I definitely think clearly there's some reforms that we can push for that are necessary, and there's sort of a, the rising tide lifts all boats. If we can, raise the bar for privacy, that's going to help everyone, but it will disproportionately help those who've been more greatly targeted by surveillance. But I think we can also work on this with technology and making crypto tools, making tools that protect our privacy not only widely accessible and affordable, but also understandable and usable by the general public, and not just by people who have a great deal of technical ability. I myself am not a technologist. I work as an activist, but I've been able to learn this stuff by having people teach it to me. But if we make it more accessible, we make it more usable, and we make it a collective experience where it's not just I'm protecting myself, but that each of us are protecting each other, because there's safety in numbers. The more of us that use these types of tools, the less that they can spy on all of us, and the safer we all are.
Stacy? I'd like to chime in, because I'm not going to chime in exactly. I'm not real concerned about the poor and the downtrodden per se, even though my wife and I were Peace Corps volunteers and did all that at a time, because what characterizes old Joe's six-pack or Jose six-pack is they can buy a six-pack, and you can get a VPN service for the price of a six-pack a month. So, let's just put this in some kind of relativity and not make a new entitlement to privacy, other than the constitutional requirement that we have an expectation of privacy inherent as human beings from our government, but not private surveillance by AT&T. You don't have that right against private surveillance. That's your market there. You don't buy it. Of course, we have no choice due to the duopoly, but what I'm going to say to you is, for the six-pack of beer, or whatever your favorite inebriant is, soon to be legalized, whatever it is, it's reachable by everybody. I just don't want to get the conversation distracted by all the worrying about the last person on earth to get it. Let's get the bulk of everybody in this room aware and start spreading from there. And maybe you'll find it in your beneficence to help someone out that turn them on. But I'm not too real concerned. I mean, this is pretty cheap stuff. It's either beer or privacy. Pick your choice.
Ron and I don't agree on everything. I think we do agree on the need to impress upon people the importance of spending at least some energy and resources and time on preserving your privacy. In many ways, you're asking about regulation, but in many ways, code is law itself. The way that the tools work and the way that we work with the tools defines what can be done to us and what we can do. And being cognizant of that is really important. But to go back to the original question, I also just want to flag that, like several of the people at the table, I come from a civil libertarian perspective, such that my primary concern is government surveillance. But that means, to the extent companies are able to build vast libraries of data about us, that data is available to the government under some legal standard, often a very weak one. And that points to, if you are concerned about consumer privacy and the data that the companies are collecting about you, you should be especially concerned, to the extent code is not protecting you, that we have law protecting you when the government wants to take that data, and building the legal firewalls that ensure that even if you decide that you want to make that trade with Google or this app or the other to share your personal information with them for a particular use, that doesn't give the government carte blanche to come and rifle through it. So.
I think are we back on? I think you might be working. All right, awesome. So yeah, I just had a few points to respond to. One thing that was kind of raised on both of my table mates on both sides of me was that there's a saying that they often say, which is that the future has no lobbyist, and so I think that's a lot of times the incumbents are the only ones that do have lobbyists, and so it's really important for newer companies and for consumer groups and for other kinds of advocacy groups to be raising these concerns when they might not be heard. And a related point is that a lot of these revelations and the about how much surveillance is going on is really, in addition to I don't know if this is more of a transition, but in addition to all of the obvious liberty issues, it's also an economic issue and a competitive issue for our companies and for trying to find business in business here and abroad. It's just there's a lot of this industry is based on trust, and if people aren't trusting these companies, whether or not the companies are actually cooperating with the government, or it's hard to tell when there's a lack of transparency. But just a lot of the revelations that have come out have really are starting to undermine that trust, and it's an economic issue in addition to a liberty issue. I just wanted to raise that. Thanks.
All right. Well, since everybody here is super excited about government surveillance.
Excited's probably the wrong word. But
No, I think you guys are very excitable. I'm like, we'll go with that. Let's hit this topic. So I'm trying to think about the best way to hit it, but let's talk about transparency reports. So we'll kind of ease into some of the constitutional issues in a bit, but let's talk about governments who have this point that governments have access to the data that companies are offering or they are collecting. And a lot of them are trying to put out these transparency reports to indicate, hey, we've been asked for this data. I personally think these transparency reports are almost useless. They don't give any sort of granularity, but how can companies improve that, and or should they even be trying to? I mean, like, how can companies kind of act as an intermediary between the one consumer and the governments, or should we be expecting that?
Yes, we should be expecting that. This is something that my organization has been doing a lot of work on, that I did a lot of work on when I was at CDT. Google was the first to issue a transparency report back in 2010, I suppose. And we've seen an enormous amount of development. A year ago, last week, Google, Twitter, Dropbox, that was pretty much it in terms of transparency reporting. And they were only reporting on law enforcement requests, although doing a pretty granular job of it, and giving us a fairly good idea of the scope of government access to our data in law enforcement investigations at their services. No one was able to report on national security requests because they were legally forbidden to. A year ago this past Wednesday, Google was the first company to issue a report that talked about how many national security letters they get. These are secret subpoenas from the FBI for subscriber information, and they they were able to get a deal with the DOJ. The DOJ said, we won't prosecute you if you choose to publish how many national security letters you get in a range of 1,000. And so they could report if they got 0 to 999 or 1,000 to 1999 NSLs. Microsoft made a similar deal a month later. This is not all the granularity we want, but it did serve a purpose. It actually, to me, as someone who's been working NSL issues for over a decade, was reassuring. It was like, wow, okay, they are receiving fewer NSLs than I feared, and it's affecting fewer users than I feared. Flash forward to June, Snowden, boom goes the dynamite, everything's crazy. It is being reported or misreported that the NSA has direct access to all these companies' servers, untrammeled access to whatever they want. The companies are immediately denying, saying that's not true, but we are gagged from telling you more about it, which has started a year-long fight of the companies and us in civil society pressing the government to let them say more. We've had some success, The DOJ has finally agreed, after litigation, a bunch of legislation being introduced, a bunch of letters being written, to let the companies say, like they did Microsoft and Google, how many NSLs they get, but also how many FISA court orders they get. Not to be too wonky, but FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, is the law that primarily governs intelligence investigations in this country. The FISA court issues a wide variety of different types of orders. They issue secret wiretaps, secret pen registers, which is tracking who's talking to who and when, access to stored content, access to stored records, and then the big boogeyman 702, which is the big programmatic wiretapping programs that we really still don't understand the scale of. That's what PRISM is. That's also what the tapping into the fiber is. And the DOJ agreed to let the companies say how many orders they've received from the FISA court, but not breaking out the type, and having to range it in ranges of 1,000. That has not given us a lot of more of a window into what's going on. And in fact, it's been somewhat misleading, because the one thing that doesn't include is bulk orders. Because they made the deal whereby, and I'm sorry to get too wonky, but I hope I'll bring it back. The government basically lawyerly worded their words so that what was agreed to was, if you are reporting on the FISA orders you receive, you can report on the number that you receive and the number of accounts targeted in the orders. Not the number of accounts affected in the orders, not the number of accounts whose data you're handing over, but the number targeted. So AT&T publishes a report following these rules. AT&T, who we know is getting bulk records requests that impact every freaking user of AT&T. And you know what their report says? That the orders affected less than 2,000 people. Because it doesn't include the thing we most need transparency about, which is the government doing bulk, untargeted requests for all of our data? That is not enough transparency. No, it's not. That is unacceptable. And we need to keep up the pressure, civil society and the companies working together, to make them give us more transparency, both to allow the companies to say more, but also to say more directly as the government about what it is doing.
That's right.
Which leads me to another point. We're in a really interesting spot. You know, a bunch of us have a very interesting relationship with the companies. We are pissed off at them about a variety of things, but we also are working in alignment with them on a number of things. And for the first time ever, because of Snowden, we have the big internet companies working with us on national security. First on transparency, and now in the past few months actually promoting reform in the form of the USA Freedom Act. That's right. And the White House's response to that has not been to give us the reform we're demanding. It has been to open a new process to look at the consumer privacy practices of the companies in an attempt to split us.
Wait, let me ask you guys, because I think this is important, but it's also a lot of information to take in.
Yes. So please interrupt.
It's good information, but if you're talking to this group of people, so we got 280 people in this room, what kind of language should they be asking companies for, and what should they be asking for from their representative and congressman? Because that's what lobbyists in DC do. They write the legal language to get what they want, and it's very hard to understand the implications. That's what your job is.
I can tell you. So go to weneedtoknow.info. That's a page run by the Center for Democracy and Technology, where I worked this past summer on this project. And that is where the companies and civil society got together to lay out very specifically in a letter exactly what they want. And what exactly we all want is the right to say the specific number of requests we've received under every specific legal authority. Please don't make us bucket them into one bucket. And the number of users affected by each of those and the type of data requested. That is what we are asking for. That is our ultimate goal. Anything that does not get to that goal is not enough. And we have practically every major internet company and every major civil society group, free speech group, privacy group on record saying that is what we need and want for us to have an accountable democracy. So.
Okay, Ron.
Okay. I'm a recovered lawyer, so I've started an internet company 20 years ago, and so law just kind of did. But I didn't forget the experience, and I'm still a civil libertarian running ISPs with access to a lot of data, and who has to answer, and I'm the one, Phil here does the geeking on it, and Carmen, who's not here on spring break, Carmen Garces handles all the to and from, and but what we get law enforcement requests. Yes, I have law enforcement from around the world contacting us for in investigating its criminal stuff. And let me say, it's just not all civil libertarian stuff. There's some dirty actors on the internet stealing stuff from you. Okay, so it's not all really clear when you're a service provider and have to deal with law enforcement subpoenas, court orders, FISA court orders. You see this stuff, and you are required to keep your mouth shut because it's an ongoing investigation, and you can't tell the people they're surveilling or getting the information on that they're investigating them for a criminal case. So this is the reality of the companies that is just broadly mentioned here. We're a service provider on the internet. We have millions of customers globally, and that is another issue. But we have to constantly make those decisions, and we're not allowed to disclose it. It's interesting work, but the criminal investigation, they don't want us to say peep to our customer. If it's copyright, that's another thing. That's civil. We send the customer a notice that we've received a copyright complaint, and that goes civilly. But I wanted to say in this, we're all talking about the government surveillance. And what started us was in 05-06 was AT&T surveillance of everybody. You remember the brouhaha when the Snowden of AT&T disclosed that AT&T had let the NSA into their San Francisco central office and installed equipment, deep packet inspection equipment. And there's a big brouhaha, and everybody, including Senator Obama, were aghast. We're going to do something about it. But when it came to the vote, he voted for immunity for AT&T from us suing them for doing that kind of stuff under the Civil Rights Act. So what the rhetoric is and what happens in Congress, but the private companies are surveilling you. And what we filed with the FCC in 06 was about AT&T. You all have consented when you signed on for the duopoly service to let AT&T surveil you with deep packet inspection. No, you've got to be a lawyer like Bankston to decipher what you consciously agreed to. And you had no choice. You were either going to get Tweedledee, AT&T in Austin, or Tweedledum, Time Warner, who have the same terms. But we filed with the FCC, hired a couple lawyers that are here today, great lawyers, and to try and alert the FCC that this ongoing surveillance is going on. And it was a dull thud. Now, the Republicans were running the FCC then, so new shot with Obama's same deal. There's not a dime's worth of difference there because they're all afraid of the telephone companies might get mad. But they are surveilling you, and the crime of it is you gave consent and didn't know it. So whenever you want to go and confront them that they're taking your pride, well, hell, fool, you gave us consent, just like you're going to give them consent for $20 off to let them surveil you and get your. So the choice is in your hands.
Ron.
Everybody, your choice, not ours, your choice.
Awesome. Go. Before we lambast Washington too much, let's get Brian's opinion.
Thanks. So briefly on that notice question, it's so fundamental. I think we understand that, but when we try to make laws, we try to make policy about this, well, the response we get is, well, there aren't that many requests. You know, is this really a problem? And of course, we don't know. They know, but they won't tell us. And so it's interesting for a historical antecedent. I was talking about wiretaps in Texas. And of course, wiretap doesn't require a literal wire, but it's listening to your phone conversation. You know, in Texas, if you've been the subject of a wiretap, whether it was your phone that was tapped or whether you had a conversation with that person, after the wiretap is over, when it's all over, the investigation's closed, everyone who was affected by that gets a certified letter notifying them what happened and when they were listened to. Man, that sounds like a great model, don't you think, for electronic privacy as well?
It's actually true for the federal law as well.
There you go.
For federal
I
law.
think they got that from us, but thanks. The good stuff they usually did. But they really did get it from us. You're right, Scott. So the point is, why not apply that same notice on this breach of privacy, which is so much more intrusive, so much more common? And so on the notice, when we were working on the cell phone location data, part of that bill required that every prosecutor and every judge report to us each year how many of these requests were made, how many were granted, what was the result of the investigation. We also had every carrier tell us how many requests did you get, how many did you grant. Of course, not people's names, but so we know what we're dealing with. And it probably won't surprise you, we got a lot of pushback from the carriers on that, but that's okay. There's nothing more fundamental than notice. And so I just want to amen what you said. We have to know how much this is happening so we can deal with it. We have a right to know.
Nope. Nope.
Denied. AT&T again, because I was about to say something nice about Verizon, their competitor. Verizon's new transparency report actually does have numbers about how many times they get location requests, which is actually a really good development. Like, that's information we did not have before and that we still don't have from AT&T, I don't think.
All right, I'm gonna go to a new question. I know you're so tolerant over there. All right. So someone asked, and this is actually a really important thing, and we can start talking about kind of constitutional rights here, which everybody loves. Someone asked, are there laws that you can sue under to take back your privacy? So that's a really broad question. Yes. So maybe we want to start with Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights. Maybe we want to talk about laws, but I'm going to open it up to you guys because y'all are experts on this. But let's talk about what laws that we have that are supposed to protect us possibly, but maybe are being reinterpreted to not protect us, and kind of where those threats are for us. Evan, do you want to start with that since I cut you off?
Sure. So one thing I think is that when we talk about privacy, obviously there's an immediate attraction to the Fourth Amendment, right? It's very clearly directly related. Search and seizure, has very clear roots in the origins of our country, being upset about oppressive British surveillance. It's something that people can relate to. But I think it's also really important that we talk about the First Amendment, right? Privacy is not about whether you have something to hide. It's about your right and your ability to be yourself and express yourself without the fear that someone's looking over your shoulder and that you might be punished by the government for being yourself, whatever that may be. And so I think, there's definitely been court cases, and I'm sure Kevin could speak more to this, and EFF has worked on it, ACLU has worked on it, but absolutely, this type of surveillance is chilling our ability to freely express ourselves. It's chilling free speech. It's chilling journalism. And so absolutely, we should definitely be tackling this from a First Amendment perspective as well as a Fourth Amendment perspective.
I totally agree. It's a First Amendment issue, Fourth Amendment issue, Fifth Amendment, they're stealing your property.
Yep.
But, you're going to have to distinguish between when the government does it and when a private business does it, because we have our constitutional rights, first, fourth, and fifth, against government violations of our civil rights, not private corporations. So the remedies against an AT&T are different than the remedies against the government. So we just can keep, when you give it up by giving them permission, you've waived it, and that's what's going to be the first thing up. Whereas you didn't give it up, that permission to the government. You're not given that consent. So we're going to have, I like the idea that having to send the letters on the civilian surveillance. I really like that. I think that's going to have a chilling effect on them. Okay.
So the perspective. Let me jump back to 2006 when, what Ron called the Snowden of 2006. A gentleman named Mark Klein, an engineer at AT&T, showed up at EFF's doorstep with diagrams showing how the surveillance machine was wired in San Francisco, and that was a big part of the lawsuit that we brought against AT&T and later against the NSA about the mass surveillance that was happening. And we brought these cases under a variety of theories. We argued the First Amendment. We argued the Fourth Amendment. This is a search and seizure of our communications. We argued violation of the wiretapping law, or ECPA, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, and violation of FISA, the intelligence law. I think we had strong, colorable claims for all of those. The biggest challenge we faced was the issue of, in lawyer speak, standing. Could we demonstrate that we had a concrete controversy that really affected us such that the court had to hear our case? And the government then and the government now has had a really great weapon to use against you when you're trying to establish standing in a mass surveillance case, which is them saying, well, where's your proof? Where's the evidence? Can you demonstrate that we actually took your communication or looked at your communication? Oh, wait, you have news stories? Well, those are just news stories. The actual facts are classified. What, you have these diagrams? Well, what the hell? Like, sorry, it's all classified, and hey, judge, if you try and litigate this, if you try and let them have discovery against us to demonstrate what's happening, you're going to hurt national security. And you're going to make it easier for the terrorists to hurt us. That is the wall we keep hitting when we're trying to assert our rights. Not that we don't have the laws to assert, but that they are using secrecy as the bludgeon, as the wall to stop us. And the hope that now my friends at EFF and back at ACLU and other organizations involved in this litigation, our hope is that the Snowden floodgates now have given us enough to convince the courts that we don't need them to give us any information. We don't need them to declassify anymore. We have enough to be able to say, hey, if you use Verizon, we know that your records have been handed over. If you use AT&T, we know that your data has gone into some government box sitting on the network, and we don't need any more information to be able to assert our rights. But that remains to be seen. So.
So much of what you said.
Right. Amen.
Okay. Go on.
Sure. So just a very quick point on the constitutionality issue, because I think it's not even a debate anymore that what they've been doing is completely unconstitutional. So we should just move forward from that and know that that's true. But I think it's important that we look beyond that as well, because I mean, look at Golden Frog. They have customers in 200 countries, right? Those people deserve privacy too. And so we have to understand that not only is this unconstitutional, it's also violating the human rights of people all over the world. And those people deserve privacy as well. The internet doesn't really make distinctions about borders, right? It's a global community, and everyone deserves this privacy. So we should be talking about this not only as a constitutional issue, but as a human rights issue worldwide.
One point on, great points, everyone. One point on making laws going forward. It's definitely really important for these laws to be technologically neutral because it's really hard for regulators to anticipate technologies that might exist a year from now, let alone 25 years from now, or however old ECPA is now. So it's really important that these laws not prejudice new kinds of technologies that consumers will widely adopt, and it's to make laws hard to enforce or be realistic in the modern age. So, yeah.
You guys really want a lot of stuff. This is actually a really interesting question. Are there models right now in other parts of the world for protecting consumer privacy from commercial entities, but also from government surveillance that we should be looking for as good things to emulate?
Let me just lead off on that, though. I'm anxious to hear what Evan and Kevin say. Besides the view that we also operate in Europe, and we really use for our customers the European privacy standards, because we got so few in the United States, frankly. So I would look to the sensitivity of Europeans, Central Europeans too, who were under the yoke of the Soviet Union. But we're just talking about the French, the German. Those folks are very sensitive to their privacy, and us as a service provider, likewise. And we're under legal restrictions in Europe. So the easiest thing is to make that your standard worldwide, because that's the best standard we have. So I would, but we Americans need to get some of the individual sensitivity the Europeans have, so we pressure our government to do what they've done in Europe. But it starts right here. But so I'm pretty much street. You know, let's do it here, and that's how we'll get the government. They're going to just like the emails from Fight to the Future, getting us to blank our websites. Okay, we did it in Giganews, and we got that worldwide customer base, and we sent them to EFF's site, so they had all the tools for sending the letters to the Congress critters. And boy, we had Germans and Dutch people saying, great, they sent emails too, because they were looking to just express themselves on these privacy issues and know that the United States controls so much of the internet that them getting a vote here affects their privacy in Europe. And I say, by us looking to them, we have examples to replicate in our privacy here.
Other models?
What was the question? I mean, so there is a pretty strict data protection regime in Europe. I think that a lot of those concepts could apply in the U.S. I think other parts of it could face some First Amendment challenge. I mean, ultimately, one of the challenges we face in the United States is if we are talking about regulating privacy, we are also talking about regulating the sharing of true facts about people. And so whatever we do to regulate privacy needs to be narrowly tailored. It needs to serve a clear, in fact, compelling government purpose. And so I'm not certain that we could actually have as restrictive a regime in the U.S. that they have in Europe, but I do think it is an aspirational model, and it's one we should look to. And in fact, that the Obama administration itself, in its blueprint for consumer privacy that it issued 2 years ago, followed in a lot of ways, basically implementing what have been called fair information practices, mostly about ensuring that you have adequate notice, ensuring that you have access to the information that is collected about you and an ability to correct it when it is wrong, and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any movement from the administration promoting that blueprint or getting it translated into any kind of legislation, much less legislation that's going to move. And right now, to jump back to an issue I started to talk about earlier, we now have another process that's in place to look at consumer privacy again from the administration. When Obama, a few months ago, did a speech about the NSA, he talked about, well, the importance of protecting our privacy against the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then he was like, but hey, look over here. The companies are also collecting a lot of data. They can't actually lock you up or render you or anything like that, but you should really be worried about the companies. I'm going to start a new process at the White House to look at the issue of big data and what issues that raises. I don't want to make light of that. I mean, I think that's an issue that is deserving of scrutiny, and that we need to be looking at how does our increase in our ability to crunch big sets of data allow us to derive new information that was never derivable before, both for useful things and for scary things. But I fear that this process has been created to divert our attention from the NSA and to cause the privacy advocates and the companies who have started to team up against the government on this issue to start fighting with each other again. And so I want to hold the companies to account. I want to make sure that what they're doing is fair and that we know what they are doing and that we regulate it reasonably. I do not think that the cost of that should be us taking our eye off the ball in terms of getting meaningful reform against the NSA. And so sorry, White House, but like that's not going to work. I mean, we're gonna work this big data process as much as we can. We want to see it generate something worthwhile, but it is not going to be at the expense of us getting meaningful NSA reform. Sorry, guys.
I want to echo Kevin's point. That's really important that these two very different privacy issues not be conflated by anyone. And the second thing to add is that on the international model issue is that it's just sometimes I'm kind of skeptical about whether these other countries' models for protecting their citizens' privacy are really just kind of national protectionism and kind of trying to deter competition from U.S. companies. And so it's hard to be. I mean, it's definitely something to think about whether what their interests are in trying to protect their citizen privacy or whether they're just trying to keep out U.S. companies that are bigger and our competition. So.
Okay, this is another question from Twitter. This may be a final question. I'm not sure what our time frame is.
We got questions from the audience yet.
We have questions. Yeah, I'm like, so here, this is kind of a call to action question. So, SOPA was defeated by a mass movement. There we go. Lots of companies, lots of individuals calling their congressmen. What can the public do, and what can people here do to take that kind of mass action and do it effectively? And I'm going to start with you because you are the guy that we're trying to target.
Thanks.
Bullseye, right?
Like no other issue, this is probably more important. Citizen engagement. It sounds like a cliche, I realize, but folks really need to hear from you because this is an unusual issue that shuffles the deck. For example, talking about these bills for cell phone location data, for email privacy. I'm a Republican. My co-authors on that bill were Representative Lon Burnham, one of the most liberal members of the House, Representative Sinfronia Thompson, a neat lady from Houston, the first black female member of the House back in the 70s, and some other conservatives, some other Tea Party folks. It really cuts across all the lines. So that's good for us. That's encouraging. That means it's a lot easier to get there. And we have to confess that sometimes it depends on who's in charge. You know, back when it was the Patriot Act, the Democrats didn't like it. And now that it's Obama doing it, the Republicans don't like it. And we have to get over that, right? We have to be consistent. We all have to do that. Amen. And I remember William F. Buckley said back in the 1980s, if the Democrats introduced a bill to burn down the Capitol, the Republicans would offer an amendment to phase it in over 3 years. You know, and that's really true in Washington. But the good news is, R&D people get this. You were talking about the USA Freedom Act to rein in some of the Patriot Act excesses. So we got, my goodness, we got Mike Lee supporting that. We've got Rand Paul with a stronger bill. Senator Cruz is looking at that bill. I think he's looking at it favorably, I believe. So there's some encouragement for us to reshuffle the deck and work across the lines. And along those lines, I bet many of us have heard of a group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. They've gotten a lot of press, and they've been the piñata, whipping boy, whatever the term is, for a lot of issues. And we may differ with them on some things, but ALEC is really taking the lead on electronic privacy, working with Republicans and Democrats. Our friend Andy McFarland is here, works with Ron, and he's been a leader on this, getting those guys involved, getting the companies and the reps, Republican and Democrat. So the good news is we're right, and people get this. I'll say this. When I walked around the floor of the House and I was getting support for these bills, I would tell my friends, now, here's what this bill does. Now, this limits what law enforcement can do. You know, we're for law enforcement. We want them to catch the bad guys. We want them to have all the tools they need. But this does limit what they can do. But that's what the Fourth Amendment does, right? We recognize that in an open society. So as we strike that balance, we have to be prepared for some of our friends in law enforcement may get a little nervous if they think we're taking tools away from them. So it's important that we engage with them. But the bottom line is, if your reps, your senators hear from you, this is important to you, they're going to get it done because the wind's at our back. Things are going our way on this. So I'm encouraged with the way things are going. So your engagement matters like it never has before. So thank you for doing this.
So amen to all that. I think that invoking SOPA here is important, and it reminds us of the power that we do have, right? Everyone believed that SOPA would pass. There was no question, right? And then in a day, we completely changed that.
Amen.
And I say we. I mean, I'm literally talking about we, the people in this room. You know, we built some of those tools that made that happen. But this is also a different situation. It's a lot easier to stop a bad bill or stop a single piece of legislation than it is to build a long-term movement that completely shifts our cultural ideas around the type of privacy that we deserve. However, I do think we need those moments, those single moments that inspire people and make people understand the power that we do have. And so I think that this is going to take a lot. It's going to take arguing for reform. It's going to take pushing on Congress. It's going to take getting those incremental steps that push us in the right direction. But it's also going to take not asking for our privacy, but taking it back with technology. And so Fight for the Future, this is something very specific when we talk about a call to action. But on June 5th, the anniversary of the first story that came out from Edward Snowden's whistleblowing, we're organizing something called Reset the Net. And we mean that literally. We plan to take back the portions of the internet that have been invaded by government surveillance, turn them off, turn them back on again with bulked up new armor, new technology like what Golden Frog and folks out here are doing that's going to keep the government out of our business. And so, this is something that we can do together because protecting yourself is important, but collectively, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people saying, heck no, I'm done with this. And I'm actually going to start doing something that makes this type of surveillance too expensive and too difficult to continue. That's throwing the wrench in the gears. And so we need to keep pushing on the government to stop doing this stuff. We need to keep telling them where we stand on it. But we also need it. We can't wait. We don't have time to wait. This could take a year for them to pass something. And whatever they pass might not get us what we need. And so we need to start right now with taking our privacy back. And we can't wait any longer for that.
Take back your internet.
I just want to add, first off, this is going to be a really cool thing, and you should, like I said earlier, code is law. And if you can protect yourself, you're basically creating law for yourself that protects you. But I think it's also important to recognize there's an old saying in D.C., particularly in our circles, it's really hard to get anywhere unless you can team up with the companies against the government, or with the government against the companies, and. It's sad, when you're fighting all the money in the world, you kind of need a heavy hitter to help you out. I think we need to not only talk to Congress directly, but we need to talk to the companies that serve us directly and say, we need you to help us on this. We are losing trust in you. To regain that trust, you need to help us address this. And you're seeing it. You're seeing the companies starting to get pissed off. When the story came out that Yahoo and Google had their data links between their servers hacked by the NSA outside the country, they got really pissed off. When they started hearing about all these exploits of Apple stuff, Apple got kind of pissed off. And so you have Microsoft starting to call the NSA an advanced persistent threat, something that you usually reserve for state-sponsored hackers, which they are. Or Apple calling them malicious hackers, or frankly, several Google engineers on Google Plus, where most Google employees say things. This was not the official word of Google, but you had these Google engineers fuck you, NSA. What are you doing? We are trying to protect our customers. We're trying really hard, and here you are breaking our stuff. Screw you. So, the companies are starting to get pissed with us. And that's actually a great opportunity. And the more that they are angry, the more that they are concerned that they're going to lose business here and abroad because of this, the more they are going to be willing to ally with us and make Congress pay attention. So I think we can help keep the pressure on Congress by keeping the pressure on the companies.
That's good. That's good. Can I throw something in?
Oh, okay.
I'd like to get to y'all's questions because that's where I think it'll rip.
Oh,
but what you're hearing here is just awesome stuff to me too. Of course, I know Kevin, but it's all in us pressuring Congress, and it's the only way it's going to work. And Evan and Tiffany and Holmes, their fight for the future, are giving us the conceptual tools, just to rabble-rouse like this. But it's a legal framework. But you mentioned big companies. You mentioned companies. Well, there's big companies, and then there's us ma and pa companies, because we're still a ma and pa company, as is the vast bulk of American business that hire y'all. It's not all. Austin's kind of big company centric because it's a government town, but we're all small companies. But the large companies that really can make it then get so invested, it's difficult for them to piss off Mother Nature, the government. So we are kind of below the radar. Some of the work has got to be with large companies that y'all work for. We're just the smaller companies around here, working in the open market rather than the big deals, that are government contract deals, this and this. We don't do business with the government. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in. There's big and small companies. So we're not all in the same scale or effect or a part of their surveillance society.
All
right, so don't call Ron and tell him to stop surveying you. All right, so from that, I got talk to your congressman. June 5th, take back,
Reset the net.
reset the net.
Reset the net.
Talk to big companies and now, or put pressure on big companies that you A, work for, B, just do business with. Don't call Ron. And now, your questions. So, I need big hands, because, okay, we're going to go guy in front. Wait, I have this brilliant idea if I can get this. Okay.
John Rowland, Constitution.org. All this sounds great, but I have sat in a club where agents hang out and listen to them joke among one another about how they were disregarding every law. They were disregarding Congress, lying to Congress, lying to their supervisors, lying to their colleagues, and it was a joke for them. So simply passing laws telling them to behave themselves is totally useless. It's especially useless outside the United States. All those privacy protections are just window dressing. But there's also another problem, where these agents also joked about is how they had people inside almost every significant organization able to operate clandestinely. So every organization, including yours, needs to ask yourself, how have you hardened yourself against infiltration? What could an infiltrator discover and reveal to his handlers? Because there probably is one, and he probably can.
So how do I get into this club?
By the way, the main one is the Hawk and Dove. It's about 6 blocks from the Capitol, D.C.
The Hawk and Dove. Okay, I'm going to check that out when I get back to town, and listen very closely. I mean, I feel you. I think that the challenge we face is often, yes, people in power will bend or break the law. I think it's ultimately cyclical. You know, we had basically a lawless state in the 60s and 70s, you know, an intelligence community that was utterly out of control, completely unchecked, everything done in secret, assassinations, spying, you know, telling MLK to kill himself, trying to blackmail him. And we passed a new regime of laws, the FISA laws in 1978, and you saw a restriction. And then you saw 9/11 and them starting to break rules again and build a new surveillance apparatus. And then you saw the passage of the 2008 FISA Amendments Act, which mostly ratified what they were doing, but placed some strictures on it, such that they, you know, contracted a bit. But then you saw that change. And so I see a cycle of, yes, they're going to reach beyond the bounds, then we're going to place new bounds and draw them in, and then they're going to reach beyond the bounds, and then we're going to have to pull them back. That is the cycle. That is the fight. That is the process we are continually going to go through. There's never going to be a time when we've reined in the government completely,
All right.
or that they have beat us completely.
Oh, okay. Bearded guy.
You guys are talking a lot about companies collecting information, but I'm curious what your thoughts are about when companies lose that information. For instance, with the Target hack, you know, it was reported that they knew about it long before it went out public, and they didn't do anything about it because they were just trying to see why their own A. So I'm curious what you guys think about that kind of activities.
I mean, there are a lot of states that have data breach laws that I think many of us are very supportive of, and that they require companies to disclose to their users when this data is breached, unless it is like super encrypted. We have seen some movement in DC on the Hill to pass a federal data breach law. One of the concerns with that is that they want to preempt the state laws, and that's problematic to the extent that, like, we saw this great experimentation in the states to develop these laws. It's actually a good thing that they can do that, and so although we'd love to see a federal standard for this, I think there is concern that doing it in a way that would foreclose states from being more aggressive is problematic. But all in all, I think data breach notification is at this point a standard in many states, and many people want to see it be a federal standard.
Do you have a question? So, first of all, a comment. So I come from Europe. I'm politically incorrect. Just to make the disclaimer. My company is called Mind Your Privacy, but I hate the privacy term. Privacy means nothing. Privacy has no real boundaries. And in Europe, we call it data protection. The data in Europe belongs to us. Here in the US, it doesn't belong to the people. It belongs to the companies that have collected it and that are using it. At the beginning of the panel, you were saying that you wanted to speak about the government surveillance and the user surveillance. I'm sorry, I've just heard the first part of the conversation, and I think that, okay, the Snowden effect, etc., has brought a lot of attention on it, but you're kind of paranoid somehow, looking from the outside. You have the state is looking at me. When in reality, the fundamental question is that the data protection, privacy is a fundamental right. And that's what you should ask your representatives. And that's my question to you, representatives. I come from Spain, so I won't vote for you. I can't vote for you. But what are you guys doing to give to the American citizens the right to have their data as ownership? They're owners of their data. There's their property.
Let me jump in ahead of the representative here. First of all, we conceive of it a little differently. They do have to have our permission. That may not be perceived by you, but let me say,
80 pages of privacy policy.
I agree with you too. In the clip wrap that nobody reads, okay, because we filed in 06 with the FCC under our Data Foundry Data Center Company about AT&T deep packet inspection equipment giving ongoing surveillance, storing your information as their work product in consideration for a little spam filtering and a few other stuff. But they sought permission in the terms of service, the click wrap. And that's it. They know they have to get permission to get around our expectation of privacy that is fundamental to our inherent rights under the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment. They know that. As a private company, they need to ask our permission so they don't get sued. But we have no choice. In Europe, you got a lot more choice of providers. Here, we get like our political process. We don't have parliamentary multi-parties. We got Tweedledee-dum and Tweedledee-dee, okay? And for broadband access, here in Austin and any about place you go that's a big city, in the country you don't have anything. Out at our ranch we have nothing. But here we get Tweedledee-dum and Tweedledee-dee. We get a telco monopoly that no other telco will compete with, no matter how big they are. Verizon doesn't put one line in AT&T territory and vice versa. Wink, wink, wink. And our government can't see the cartel working. But likewise, the cable companies. You know, pardon me? Go ahead. Good, I better shut up.
Oh, thanks. Oh, thanks. So I would say under the U.S. system, obviously there's a distinction between protection from the government and from other people. And so obviously the Fourth Amendment says that the people are secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure. And a warrant has to be based on probable cause for the government to get that data, that information. And so that's a real problem because that's not happening today. The Fourth Amendment is not being... Yeah, I'm getting to that. So that's on the government side. As far as individuals, and the question about data breach was a very good one. In the American system, if our system is working right, if it's working right, we have a duty to one another when we engage in the marketplace to act reasonably, to keep our word. And when we don't, the answer is a civil lawsuit. And a civil lawsuit in America is kind of a scary thing. I don't know if you've ever been sued before, but you know, a lot of money's involved, reputation's involved, damages, punitive damages can come into play. So when a company or an individual acts in a bad way, in America, the tort system, that's private lawsuits, that's supposed to keep us in line. And it's also an example to others not to do that again. Now, it doesn't always work right, and there are inefficiencies, but that's how it's supposed to work. If those companies are breaking the rules, if they're breaking these data breach laws or even basic negligence rules, they're supposed to be held accountable that way. Again, the problem comes in because the government gets in the way, and we protect these companies for doing wrong. That's the real problem. The government needs to get out of the way so the market can work. But there is a distinction. You're right.
And our common law
It's a
system is
constitutional right.
Also, I spend most of my time on copyright, and so this is another way where our law is different about how we think about our rights in a very different way. So I think that your points are important, but I think that a lot of our common law system thinks of these rights in different ways, which is why our regimes differ.
All right. Okay. So everybody, I'm going to take 2 more questions, starting with.
Hi, Laura Moy, Public Knowledge. So it seems like there's some consensus among the panel about government surveillance, compelled disclosure of information, but there's disagreement about corporate surveillance, situations where companies are buying and selling information. And I guess I'm curious about situations where the government is buying information from companies, which we know happens. Charlie Savage wrote an article late last year about AT&T selling information, selling call records to the CIA. So I'm curious to know what your views are on whether or not regulation is appropriate in those situations.
It's almost like you've recently filed comments with the FCC about this issue, Laura.
Well, can I?
It's fundamental. I mean, that's fundamental. At some point, that becomes a government action, and so they can't say, well, that we're private companies. But I agree. I think we have to look at that. Let me just say this, and allow me a gross generalization. Big government and big business are often working together against the people and against small business and families and real people like us, dare I say. And this may be an example of that. Now, again, I don't know how specific we want to get, and I bet other panelists could do a better job. But I'm a free market guy. When a company is acting in concert with the government like that, we can hold them accountable, and we can get those protections from the government, from against that same company. Is that what you're talking about? I mean, I totally agree with that.
Let me
Where do you
speak
draw
to
that
that.
line?
We've offered a solution to that in the only piece of open net neutrality, but open net, not legislation. And rather than, I think it's a fool's errand that we're going to get our government to regulate these big companies. The FCC is captured by the telephone companies. They're regulated. It doesn't matter who's in Austin. The big telephone companies are still the king. And so it doesn't matter which party takes control of the FCC, the result is the same. The regulated runs the regulator. You notice on the SEC, there's been no big perp walks for the biggest financial fraud in our history. Okay, the regulators don't do anything. We propose to give everybody a cause of action when they interfere with your connection. Oh, it may be worth $2 in damages, but you aggregate millions, and there's some plaintiffs' lawyers that'll take that case on the contingency they win, and you put them up the tailpipe of a big company. They don't sweat the regulators because they'll own them, hire them, whatever you want to say. FTC, SEC, FCC, get all of them together. But they sweat plaintiffs' lawyers on a class action coming up their tailpipe. That will make them change because it's big bucks. And each one of us doesn't have much bucks, but together it's big bucks. But now that's not a solution. It's a private market solution, not a government solution. It's not one the Republicans like, but the Democrats love regulation. And the way we're going to get it is individual rights asserted by all of us, aggregated by some tush hogs taking a percentage of the case and financing the case. Okay, so try that.
Carl Schwenker. I'm an attorney here in Austin. Unlike Ron, I'm not reformed. I actually have a case that I've filed against some of the companies you talked about, a big privacy case. A lot of problems seem to be that a lot of people talk about privacy in the ether without any real definitional context. What does privacy mean to each of you?
Keep your mitts off my bits.
Sure. So super quick, I think privacy is essential to anything that you care about. Whatever your issue is, whatever the thing that you want to change in the world, making change in the world requires challenging entrenched power. And if those with entrenched power have the ability to steal our data and use it against us, we're not going to be able to challenge them effectively. So whatever you care about, you need to care about privacy. It's about your ability to change the world.
Mine is not going to draw applause. I actually hate using the word privacy. I mean, to say, you know, as I think someone else, like, it means so many different things to so many different people. You know, I'd rather focus on this or that constitutional right, or this is a very lawyerly answer, this or that constitutional right, this or that statutory right. But ultimately, if I had to come up with some definition of it, it is the power to preserve for yourself some level of autonomy about what you think and what you do and who you associate with. And the ability to find that quiet space where it is only you deciding what you believe and no one else deciding it for you. And you can only do that. Maybe it was an applause line. You can only do that free from the watchful eye of others. You need to have that space for yourself. And ultimately, if what I want to protect is privacy, then that's what I want to protect.
I'm gonna define privacy as property, in the sense that your information is your property, and you're letting someone steal it from you. Now, you can let them steal it if you want, but if you don't want, it's theft. So I would define information as property, and the government can't take it without due process, and the private business can't take it without your informed consent. And when you only have Tweedledee and Tweedledum as a choice, you don't really have informed consent. But I would approach it as property.
Thanks, Ron. Man, I wish I'd written down your definition and what you said, but our founders talked about the concept when they said we're to be secure. We shall be secure in our persons, houses, papers, and effects. My person's pretty obvious. House, my home is my castle, whether it's a house or an apartment or a place in a hostel or it's my car. My papers are my papers, and now papers are electronic, and my effects, my stuff. I mean, I think that's constitutionally, I believe that's the concept. You know that, but you have challenged me to come up with a good definition. I think I'm going to plagiarize my co-panelist here.
Lots of great points have been made. Yeah, I think privacy is essential to being free, so it's really important.
Okay, I'm going to call this the last question because it's 8:30, but Ron, you've got the mics. You can.
Listen, it's our party. Y'all want to talk, let's talk, you know, so more questions until, it's kind of like Willie Nelson. He'll sign autographs until an hour after everybody doesn't want an autograph. So let's go for it.
If we're going to keep going, maybe someone should bring us some drinks.
Whiskey.
More ice.
I'll have a Hefeweizen, please. Thank you.
All right. So, my question, and maybe some people in this audience aren't aware of what the third-party doctrine is, but it's kind of an important thing to learn about. So, but my question is, how can we strike down the third-party doctrine, not just at the state level, like what we've done with protecting the email rights of Texas citizens, but also at the federal level? I mean, that to me is very important.
I mean, yeah, we might want to say what the third-party doctrine is. So it'll take a minute or two. But so much of this debate hinges on this basic legal theory that arose from some Supreme Court rulings in the 70s. In the 70s, there were a couple of cases. A case about bank records and a case about the information, your dialing information when you call people. And the Supreme Court held that when you transact with the bank or when you dial a phone number that's transmitted to the phone company to connect your call, you're sharing that information with that third party, voluntarily exposing that information to that third party, and in doing so, you're assuming the risk that that third party is going to share your information with the government such that you do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that information. But it is a reasonable expectation of privacy that defines whether you have a Fourth Amendment right such that getting that information by the government requires a warrant. And so right now, for example, the government is saying, well, yeah, we're getting the records of everyone who everyone is calling, But under this case from the 70s about a little device that was literally attached to an individual phone line and printed out a paper tape of the electrical signals of when you dialed a phone number and didn't even tell you if the call was completed, much less how long it was or anything like that, that's somehow comparable to them getting comprehensive logs for years at a time of every phone call made in the country. That's the third-party doctrine that this young lady is speaking about, and that at this point is so pernicious when applied to new technologies that have nothing to do with what we saw before. I actually wrote a paper with a friend of mine, Ashkan Soltani, who's a technologist, who's also been the technologist doing all the technology side of the Washington Post reporting on the NSA thing. And we charted how the cost of surveillance has been dropping over the decades. And one could have applied this logic to this kind of surveillance, but we applied it to location tracking. And we compared how much it cost to like follow a guy covertly in some cars with some agents. And then compared that to attaching a beeper to their car, to attaching a GPS device to their car, to tracking their cell phone. And you literally go from it costs thousands of dollars a day to it costs pennies a day. And when you see that kind of massive shift in the capability of what the government can do, to be hinging our decisions based on how technology worked in the 1970s is insane, and is basically a recipe for us giving away all of our privacy, however you define it. So how do we overturn it? Well, there's a really hopeful sign. There was a case about location tracking that the Supreme Court decided a couple of years ago, US v. Jones, and it involved GPS devices attached to cars. And the court had held before that you've exposed yourself when you travel on the public roads such that tracking you didn't violate an expectation of privacy. But 5 justices of the Supreme Court said, we think this is different from those cases in the 80s about location tracking under that technology. And that, however, we don't know exactly what the line is, but we think that being able to comprehensively track your location for 28 days without ever being even close to you, but simply pressing a button, is different. And that it does violate your expectation of privacy. So I think the Supreme Court has opened the door to a revisiting of the third-party doctrine, and opened a door that hasn't been opened. Like, this is our first huge chance to really overtake this. And so I've talked far too much.
It's tremendous. Allow me to make one distinction about the third-party doctrine. That has to do with what the Supreme Court says the Fourth Amendment means, right? So if we get rid of the third-party doctrine, then the Supreme Court could very well rule that the Fourth Amendment requires the level of protection we're talking about. And I hope that happens. But even if that doesn't happen, even if the Supreme Court says the Fourth Amendment does not protect this stuff, that's nothing is stopping Congress from passing laws to do what we need to do. So that's the good news. I hope we can see the third-party doctrine thrown out, but even if it doesn't happen, we can still win. And I think Congress, bless their hearts, I think they're trying. I mean, if you look over history, 1934, they outlawed wiretaps. I keep talking about wiretaps. They outlawed wiretaps. Then in 1968, they came back, and they allowed wiretaps to put rules on them, and they also included sort of the cutting-edge electronic communication, more than just wiretaps. Then in 1986, they tried to update that law, and they tried to include emails and all the technology at the time, and they did a pretty good job. But if you go back and look at that, they're trying to give us the protection we need. They just haven't done it since 1986. So I hope the third-party doctrine goes away, but even if it doesn't, we can still win. I think that's important.
And so I'll just add to that, and perhaps Allie wants to as well. Right now, there is a years-long fight that is culminating on Capitol Hill to do what y'all have done in Texas, which is, regardless of what the courts say about the Fourth Amendment, the government should have to get a warrant if it wants your private communication, whether it's stored in your house or in the cloud. And so there's there are several ECPA reform bills out there. There's a big coalition, the Digital Due Process Coalition, that's been fighting for it and is still fighting for it, and could definitely use your support.
We're losing that half, so I'm like, do I see questions? I see no questions. Going twice. Oh, there's a question.
I'm just curious to hear what kind of work y'all are doing on the ground to kind of mobilize and organize people to speak up for these kinds of protections and rights.
Perhaps the activist.
Oh, me, the token activist. No. So this is a super exciting time to be involved, and I seriously encourage, when I said earlier that we invoke SOPA a lot around this, and SOPA was an epic fight, but this needs to be even more epic, because stopping a bill is significantly easier than shifting our entire culture and creating a whole new set of both policies and technology that can protect us. But this movement has been growing incredibly quickly. Fight for the Future, Demand Progress, EFF, there's dozens of organizations out there working on this, and I encourage you to get on their email list, get active, and get involved. Sometimes it's as simple as clicking and emailing your congressperson or calling. Sometimes there really are concrete ways that we can laser focus on one bill or one thing that gets us what we need. But more importantly is that we need momentum and we need involvement from as many people as possible. So one thing that we did recently this past year, we crowdfunded a video. You can find it at thensavideo.com. And we didn't just throw it up online. We wanted to show that people care about this enough to get out in the streets. So we projected it onto the side of a huge building in Manhattan and brought out about 300 people that spilled out into the street to show that they're not just going to take this sitting down. And so I think it's incredible. And then, a few weeks later, we turned out 3,000 people in D.C. at the Stop Watching Us protest. People from across the political spectrum. I've never stood on a stage with such political diversity. I mean, it's pretty astounding, right? You have Dennis Kucinich and Representative Amash speaking back to back. That's serious. That's the type of unity that we need to fight this. And so I strongly encourage everyone to get involved and to stay involved. That this isn't just one thing that we can fix in a day. It's something we're going to have to stay up on probably for years.
Let me jump. Exactly. That's a longer, so our results when we filed with the FCC in 2006 about deep packet inspection, and we mentioned the third-party doctrine is the problem is what nothing was going to happen on that time frame. That's 8 years ago. This a little more mature. So rather than get mad at the political process, get even. So we're technologists. We'll create some tools to protect our privacy. And there are tools. You can encrypt whatever the NSA got. It's a bunch of gibberish. Or they may have to go 10 years before they get enough processing power to decrypt you. But you can take it upon yourself. Yes, we started a service to do that, found global demand for this. There's a lot of countries, far more surveillance than ours, I don't need to mention them, but our second largest customer base is in China. But nevertheless, you've got encryption here, Phil Zimmerman, PGP. We just don't use them. We just say, for 20 bucks off, or as I've said for years, Americans will sell their privacy for 2 coupons and a box top. And that's the kind of cheap deal we're doing. You have got to think better of yourself. You have got to realize you're a freeborn American SOB and work to get away with it. And encrypt yourself and frustrate the government. On an individual basis, we wait for the mass movement, the guys that fight for the future and girls, they're going to help give you direction and a framework to express it politically. And Kevin is going to belabor, as many others are, including us, to give you a legal framework and fight the tremendous lawsuits they have. It's just ultimate respect for EFF that people don't know started here in Austin. When the Secret Service invaded our old customers, the Jackson brothers, Steve Jackson Gaines, and walked in and took all their servers because they're looking for one guy. All the innocent people, I would give to you Mega Upload too. All the innocent people using their service. Hello, Kim. Come see us at Texas. No, we can't. We'll have to come see you at New Zealand. But they were taking it. So you've got to take an individual step while at the same time working massively to get the government on our side with data protection. Thanks, y'all.
Amen. Thanks, Ron. So we've said this, and I'm so glad you asked that question. Politicians talk about building coalitions. Well, it's real here. We have the ACLU, and we have the Conservative Coalition and the Tea Party. They're all together on this. Oh, thank you. And so,
maybe this requires a toast.
And so they're all together on this, and there's a reason for it, because it's not just a cliche that in America, the government really does work for the people. I mean, it's still true. Aren't you glad that's still true in America? Aren't you thankful for that? I am. I really am. And you know what? I hope so too. You know what? I don't trust the Republicans with this kind of power, And I don't trust the Democrats with this kind of power. And so when you call your congressman and your senator, talk to them about the USA Freedom Act. Congressman Sensenbrenner, who wrote the Patriot Act, he realizes it went too far. So he's authored the USA Freedom Act. Please remember that for your senators, congressmen. It's the biggest blow we can strike right now against this surveillance state. It doesn't go far enough, but it helps. So we don't trust anybody with this kind of power because we're all fallen sinners. And you don't want to give me that kind of power either. And so we're thankful to have a system where the government has to listen to us. If they don't listen to you, you can run against them or vote them out. Now, before you run against me, talk to me. Give me a chance before they have a button. But your activism really does matter. It really works. I can attest it works. Thank you guys for being here.
All right. I've got orders here. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank your panelists.
To USA freedom in all senses of the word.
And everybody, a toast to privacy.
Cheers, guys. I did.
I was born in Thailand. So
I don't know. What was that?
What was it? In the 80s.
It was Makers.
House of Representatives back when Rick Perry was a Democrat.
Thank you, everyone.